Welcome back, everyone. This is LiveLock, and today I'm going to be giving you some advice on how to form pug groups to actually time 20s. At this point in the season, 20s aren't too hard anymore, so the only thing stopping you from actually getting your portals, which is a decent goal at this point, is the group formation. Since I pug most of my keys nowadays, I've learned a few things about what to do before, during, and after the runs to actually try to maximize those chances. Some of these things people won't like, some of them will be a little controversial. Most of them will be hopefully pretty obvious as to why they work, but I'll start off with the things that you should be doing before your run, which is probably the most important time. This is basically when you're doing the group formation process. So in general, there are a few things to keep in mind. The first most important thing is just be patient and don't rush it. You're going to be using your own keys mostly for this stuff because you want the control that comes along with that, even though it's a little inconvenient having to always be the one that's like, the boss. You're doing the tanking, you're doing the routes, you're doing the group formation. I know it's kind of annoying, but in the end, it does take less time than just kind of rolling the dice and leaving it a chance. So don't fill quickly. But on the other end, you also don't want to be that entitled. So you shouldn't be expecting to get 2,600 players if you're just, doing a 20 for your portal, for example. You may get lucky sometimes, and there's some 2,700 player that's doing a warm up, and you're the lucky key where he pumps, but I wouldn't count on that. So I'd expect people to be around your talent level. And that means you have to be honest with yourself about how good you actually are. You don't need to be amazing to time 20s by any means. I think at 20, what really has to happen is you have to not mess up that much, and your DPS have to actually do good damage. I think if you have those two things, then you'll probably time all of your 20s. As long as you aren't wiping very often, obviously. And if you are wiping, then you should be reviewing those videos just to make sure, was it your fault? Because if it was, then you've got some work to do. Now, to move on to concrete advice, I don't have this part actually taped, so I'm just doing some LFG B-roll for my monk, but the whole idea here is you want to set up your own key. The title, I don't think matters a whole lot. Put the things that you think you need if you need some things. If it's Spires of Ascension, then maybe you want to put Kieran. That doesn't really matter a whole lot. The important part is that you have to use Raider.io to actually filter people out of your search. So what does that actually mean? That means using Raider.io, like you see here. You just right-click them, copy their Raider.io profile, put it into your browser, and you come over here. And in my experience, the most important thing to look at here is the most recently timed mythic runs. So this is my Death Knight. This is after I did the 20s. This is what I look like over here. Now, when I was looking myself, I was looking for a 20 top and a 20 spires. So I would put them in, and if they would show up like my monk over here, my alt monk, then I would see okay, recent time mythic runs. They've got 15, 14, 17, 16, okay. And it's not that they're a bad player, but if you just want to make sure that you can actually time, your dungeons and not waste a bunch of time, depleting and re-pushing it again, then the thing to look for is a recent timed run, hopefully multiple timed runs, where they have at least the key you're trying to do. So in my case, I only took people that had, really the most 20s I could find, because, once you get to 20, the applicants actually start to become a bit higher quality, or at least you get a lot more of them. So you'll have your pick, somewhat at least, and you can go through them. It's really annoying to copy all of them and put them all in here, but you just want to make sure that you're not getting my protection warrior over here, who hasn't done a key since November, early November. So that won't actually guarantee that they're great players, right? But you really want to make sure that you're doing the most you can at this point in the process to maximize your odds of winning. And you can't you can't request videos of them. You can't request logs. That would take forever. This is a reasonable way to start off with just weeding people down a little bit. And there is a lot of information on Raider.io, but I've experimented with going back and forth with how deep do I dive into their history, right? Do I want their credit score? Okay, what was how long ago was this one done? Or this is a bit overkill in my experience. I didn't get any better results for going deeper and deeper. I find if they can do what you want them to do and they've done it recently, then that's 90% of what you want. And there's another piece of advice that I wasn't sure whether or not I should put it into this video, but it is the truth, and it is sort of how things work right now. And the sad truth is that on my battle group, there's a couple of servers that are sort of labeled. You know, it's like Ragnaros, Kel'Thalas, Azralan, and Bartholus. And I think in the case of Bartholus, it's oceanic, so there's like really high ping. People tend to not want to bring people from those servers. I actually don't have a ton of bad stuff to say about people from Bartholus. I think it's harder for me to play on their server than it is for them to play on like an NA server. I think they're probably used to being oceanic like their whole life at this point, so they've adapted to it. But you know, it seems like a higher risk one. So I don't have a ton of problems with that server, but something is really strange with the other 3 servers. And like I thought it was just in my head, and I kept on giving like people from the servers chances, but like always weird things would happen. Like they would just, you know, lust halfway through a fight. They would like just stand in something like over and over again. And these aren't like, you know, bad players on paper. Like a lot of them had pretty high Raider IO, like 24 to 2600. So it really surprised me over and over again. But I talked to a few people that are from these servers originally, and they tend to agree with the observation that something weird is going on those servers. And, you know, while they live close to the server, they've transferred off. And there's a sort of like selection effect for the people that remain on the servers that may describe or may explain some of the behavior. But like, you know, when I'm thinking about, you know, and like, do I want to risk, you know, not timing the key? I do admit that I do kind of omit people from certain servers. And, you know, I figured I would include that because if you're on one of those servers and you don't understand, you know, like why aren't people inviting me, it's only fair that you know, like what dynamic exists on the battle group. So maybe something you can do is just like transfer to another server to avoid the situation. Like whether or not it's fair, you know, it kind of like, it is the truth, and it's easier to just, you know, deal with the truth than try to hide it or sweep it under the rug. Another thing that I do that people may not like is I prefer easy classes whenever I can. And in general, the easiest classes are like melee DPS. So like Windwalker Monk, Arms and Fury Warrior, Demon Hunter. Like these are all classes that it's not that hard to do really high damage on. Like they have a pretty simple rotation. I think they've got a pretty low skill floor. So like good players will be really good on them, but bad players won't be as bad as like a bad player on a Shadow Priest. So if you find yourself in the position of picking between, you know, maybe a 2400 Shadow Priest and a 2300 Windwalker Monk, then, well, that's unfair because monks are just like kind of crazy right now, but maybe a 2200 Arms Warrior. Like I would mostly prefer to go with the Arms Warrior because I've had really mixed experiences with Shadow Priests. Like they apparently have a hard rotation, and it shows. Sometimes people are just, you know, having off days, but I don't really have that much problem with Arms Warrior, and I like them because I can count on them. You know, if something goes wrong, there's 2 targets left. You know, they have really good 2-target cleave, so they've got a unique damage profile. But it's generally pretty safe to go with like Demon Hunter, Warrior, Windwalker, at least if they, you know, they have the sufficient rating that you're looking for. And in the next section, I'll go over, you know, what to do when you find out that you were wrong, even though you took the precautions that I described. Another small thing that I tend to do now is I never invite people that whisper me. Like something, I think it's like an ego thing, like I'm not sure. Like if they're overly confident or if they boast in a whisper that they'll carry me. Like I've just had, you know, the worst experiences with people like that. They just, if things don't go their way, they'll leave, like they'll insult other people that are like, you know, trying but failing at something. And even when the run's going bad, like you don't want to have a bad time playing the game, right? Like something about people that do that, I've found to, I just like stay away from them. Yeah, just, you know, if you get any hint of ego, then, you know, even if they have a really high rating, just don't do it. I think it's not worth it. And moving on to the last thing you can do before the run. This is like literally right before the run. This depends a lot on the dungeon, but, you know, once you've waited, once you've gotten the people that you want, you don't know that they're amazing, you'll find out basically the hard way right now. For something like Spires of Ascension, you want to make sure that you lay out your entire plan like up front. And this is easier for some dungeons than others. Like it's really hard to describe what you want in Necrotic Wake because there's a ton of things that you want. But like in Spires, for example, this week, I was making the executive decision that I wasn't going to be doing any double spear pulls. Like I've had a lot go wrong on lower keys with pugs, and the timer is pretty lenient on Spires, so I'm pretty confident that we can time it. I just don't want to take any chances. Like, you know, it's a little bit less fun, but, you know, that's what I'm doing. So I tell people that up front. If I get anyone that's like, you're an idiot, then this is a good time to find out that they're going to say that, because, you know, I can reform the group and remove them. Mostly people are like, okay, yeah, like, oh, like, okay, whatever. But at this point, it's just up to fate, right? Like, you've done your due diligence, you have the people, they meet the criteria, and you have to see, you know, if the metrics accurately represent them. So now is the time to actually start looking for those signs. So what are those signs? There's a couple of things you can look for. Just in general, I can say this is kind of why I set up my details the way I do. I track usually damage for the current run, damage overall, healing done. That's like just for my own knowledge. Avoidable damage and interrupts are the two things that I usually track for this reason. So I can tell pretty easily if someone isn't going to be like an amazing player if, you know, it's been 2 or 3 pulls and they've yet to actually interrupt anything. And similarly, if the avoidable damage is showing them like, you know, just topping everything, it's a little bit weird for this week because storming makes avoidable pretty high, but it's sometimes like not really avoidable. So I don't make sure that you actually know, you know, what you're looking at. Just don't blindly look at the avoidable damage taken, but it is a good proxy. Another thing that you're looking for is a good attitude paired with good performance. So I had a 21 Spires, and that was depleted, and I have a 20 Spires, so I can kind of look at them head to head and see, you know, at various points in time, like when should I have known that this wasn't going to end up well. So I'm playing the 21 Spires here. This is the one that was depleted, and we're wrapping up the first pull. Both of the first pulls were similar. You know, we Bloodlust and we pull 6 plus the Goliath. Now, as we're wrapping up the Goliath, I'm able to peer down to the DPS meter, and I see that, you know, we've got 37k, 24k, and 18k. I'm like, ooh, like I don't know how this is going to end up working out. And by the second pull, I almost certainly know that something is like not right. You know, like this is now the run is in jeopardy because things are going like way too slow. Like this second 3-pack over here ends up taking like another minute, I think, before we finish them. So, you know, we kill the first pack in like 50 seconds or so, and then there's like 3-pack right after it. I mean, granted, the cooldowns are down, and you know how mages are. Like, they do like, you know, 5k DPS when there's no cooldowns, but regardless, I know it's not going to be enough. So at this point, like, you know, right? And I think if I skip ahead a little bit, at the end of this pack, we have something like 18, 11, and 10k damage for each of the damage players. So that's a good reference point. You know, it's like about, you know, 18, 20, 30, like about 40k damage between all of them. Now I can compare that with the 20 over here. And this is the same pull, just, you know, 1 key level lower. Not that much different, to be honest. We have someone die, but that's fine because, you know, he did his damage first, which is perfectly fine. At the end of this Goliath, we have 33, 31, and 25. So it's already looking way different. And the timer for this is actually looking better as well. So at this point, I know, like, okay, this feels like how it's supposed to be, you know. Like, the monk wasn't head and shoulders above everybody else. He's pretty even with the arcane mage. And if we go to the end of this run, this pack rather, we can see the dynamic overall damage there is like 18, 18, 15. So, you know, we almost have a whole another person in this run compared to the last run. And for me, that's really what my runs come down to, whether or not they succeed or fail. It's like, do we have damage that are doing, you know, what you should be doing for, you know, your gear level at this point in the expansion? And of course, your expectations will vary by dungeon, but I think Inspires being upwards of 10k, that's like, okay, that's pretty good. And if it's something like Mists being around, you know, 12k at least, that's going to be a great thing. Like, if you're pulling 8k nowadays in most dungeons, then it's going to make the dungeon, like, just needlessly hard to time. And just to drive the point home with another example, my 20 top from this week, it had a mixed group. So one of them was like doing like a lot of damage, and the rest were doing, you know, lower damage. And by the last fight, I think we end up timing by like a minute and a half or something. We have someone dead during the last boss fight, we have like a ton of deaths as well, like 12 deaths. Like a lot of mistakes were made, and the only reason that we timed this is because the Demon Hunter kind of carried on damage. So it really is like entirely about damage. And with the obvious caveat that you have to be doing your job the best you can do it, obviously, right? So while you're actually looking to see, which of the DPS players you're trying to run with again in the future, because that's the ultimate goal here, just make sure you're also looking at your own behavior and what you can do better. Like in this run, the 21 Spires, I make the mistake here of not grouping them before the spear happens, and then someone, I guess it was the shaman maybe, just like blew them all away, and this like totally tanked the monk's ability to do like giant burst AoE damage. So, my takeaway here, and I talked to the monk about this as well. Like, okay, that was my mistake. I really should have Gorfine's Grasp onto the commander, and spoiler alert, I do run with the monk again because I was impressed with his performance and attitude. The first thing I do the next time we get to this poll in the 20 Spires is I group them all onto the squad leader so everybody can definitely get out all of their AoE damage. And this time around, the mage is definitely doing a lot more than the other mage. Like before the hunter and the monk can even get their damage out, the mage just like was like destroying things. He was actually kind of doing a warm up for, I guess, hierarchies that he was going to do later. So I had no complaints about that, obviously. But he was doing the same damage overall as the monk was. And yeah, like small takeaways like that, just make sure that you act upon them. Another concrete sign I look for when I'm running with pugs is their ability to follow instructions. So I always say at the start of the third boss in Spires, which is right here, that I'm going to do a solo orb soak on all of the orbs, because DK is like crazy at soaking orbs, because if you AMS, you don't get, the dot from a lot of the orbs. So it's like half the damage that another tank would get, and you obviously have like crazy self-healing, so it doesn't even matter in the first place. But in this run, and in the 20 as well, in the 21 as well, I'm pleased to see that everyone follows the instructions, and like, no harm done here, which is great. But often it's the case that like even in 20 sometimes I'll have like a hunter, go and turtle and run into that stuff, but like we need damage. Like that's why the damage people are here. Like, as a tank, you want to enable them to do damage so that the key can actually be timed, right? Like, you can live it. You can do it. Just, they have to follow instructions, and you have to do your part. The last tip that I have for you, so that was the what to do during, and before that, what to do before the run. But this is the what to do after the run part. And this is probably the most important. It's well, I don't know about most. It's as important as the before. And for some people, this is the easiest part, and for some people, this is the hardest part, because it involves, like, being social, which isn't always that easy for people that play this game. But you have to take a look at the people that you think performed very well, and what I like to do is whisper them, like saying like thanks, or maybe saying like sorry for something that you did. Like don't blame anybody else for the run, but just like just reach out to them. And ideally, what you would do is run another dungeon right there and then with them. Like basically like. In this case, for the Spires, we didn't time the 21, but I reached out to the monk and I said, like, are you down for the 20, more or less? And the answer was yes, and we did it, and it worked out pretty well. So over time, you just begin to accumulate people like this in your friends list. And there's a great add-on for doing this called, like, I think it's called friend groups. You can tag them as like melee DPS or range DPS or healer, whatever they are. But just don't let people like perform really well and then never talk to them again because you're antisocial. I know it is kind of awkward to talk to people in this game because you just want to log on when you want and not have any connections, more or less. But just living like this will make your life so much easier in the future. Like you'll get your portals way faster. You'll time keys way more often if you're running with people that you know are good, rather than just like using Raider IO as a proxy, which, is a good starting point, but has its drawbacks. So I hope this helps some people out there. If your goal is to get your portals before next season, like these next 2 weeks are pretty easy. I think this is like a reasonable goal to go about them and try to, rack them all up before things get hard again next patch when we reset everything. But let me know if you have any questions. Sorry if I offended anybody with my recommendations, and good luck.